So maybe I should say, welcome to Are You There, Todd? It's me, Taylor. Episode 4?
Episode 4. I'm sure. Why not? I mean, I'm sure when you really do the math, it's probably like 7 or 8 or something. But that's just it's keeping people on their toes at this juncture.
So here's what we should do, though, because honestly, I like the prankiness of just having different episode numbers and confusing people, but I realize that is very annoying metadata-wise. Here's a short explanation, is that 1 week we recorded 2 podcasts, episode 2, and then we decided to do a focused podcast, which we were going to call episode 2.5. Episode 2 we had some technical recording glitches with that we thought we could get over, but we went ahead and released 2.5 before that as 1.5, and then 2 never materialized. So as this episode, I'm going to retcon everything, and we're going to have episode 0, episode 0.5, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, and no more 0.5s.
Awesome. There we go.
So
that works.
Now that we've got that on the record,
yes,
that should appease the Patrick Clarks of the world.
That's right.
Or, I don't know. I don't actually know if he's grumpy about it. You had some business to talk about, which is the name.
Well, yeah, we've had some new listeners since last week. Some former colleagues and friends have discovered the show slowly but surely, and are fans of it, but have referred it to me as the Todd and Taylor Show. And that's probably because they started listening to it when that was sort of what we were referring to it as, and that's what's on the SoundCloud thing. So this could just be branding more than anything. But it got me thinking. I'm like, it is simpler to just simply say Todd and Taylor Show, and it's short, it's easy to remember. I am a fan of Are You There, Todd? It's me, Taylor. I think that could stick, but I wanted to at least pose to you the idea of just going simple and keeping it that way, or are you partial to sort of the name so far?
Funny that would come up because Mr. Patrick Clark, the other fan my friend who's tweeted at us several times after he listens to the episodes.
He's doing the Lord's work.
I know, yeah. He gets really upset that I don't think Arrow is any good. But
that you personally don't think Arrow's any good?
Yeah, that was just a trolling comment. I'm just hoping to get him to jump in there. Anyway, he had tweeted at me about that. He said, just pick a name, damn it. And I said, actually, I just refer to it as the Todd and Taylor Show.
Yeah.
But to me, it's like it's like a running gag to keep changing the name. So he was not down with that. So we did get that feedback. Like he doesn't care what it is, but he wants us to pick something. And it's you and I, when we were trying to come up with names, we both sort of said, Todd and Taylor Show's okay right now. So that's kind of how we ended up with it to begin with.
I think it's catchy. It's memorable,
It's very easy. You know what you're getting. It's a show. It has Todd on it. It has Taylor
That's
on it.
right. And we can always initialize and be TNTS, when we want to be really hip and meta about it and that kind of stuff too.
Yeah.
I like that. Let's just stick with that for now. Todd and Taylor Show, and that way, it's easy. And we can always have an episode or even like a section eventually titled Are You There, Todd? It's me, Taylor. We can save that for a special use because I feel like I think as we're getting into a groove, I feel like we're getting to a point where we can start titling individual episodes certain things, or have certain kind of shout outs titled with titles that have come up in previous discussions. So maybe
that'd be great.
Let's just stick with that. So from this point on, Patrick, it is the Todd and Taylor Show for the immediate future, for the near future, for the far future, until a better name comes along, I guess.
Cool.
Yep. Well,
agreed.
That's that out of the way. Let's start with our previews,
which were pretty slim pickings this week. I don't know if we were just uninspired. You mentioned that you saw Inside Out and that you were inundated with previews, so you're kind of burned out on them.
Yeah, inundated with previews for animated movies that all look the same. And then maybe it's just because I'm older and I have been watching a lot of Alejandro Jodorowsky stuff lately, which is completely not kid-friendly at all. But it just kind of like my brain kind of shut down after I was just like, okay, another one. And that's where we are right now. So yeah, there's not really much, and to be honest, like we're kind of in the middle of the summer movie season now. So a lot of the stuff we would be previewing is either happening or has happened, and we're kind of not to that next wave yet of announcing like fall stuff. Doctor Who, I'm sure will be announced soon. Some of these fall movies and things will be announced. So I don't think there's really anything really to touch on here for once.
True, and I'm I'm fine with that. I mean, what are you looking forward to this summer? I should say. Maybe that's kind of a preview.
Yeah, so I mean, as far as movies go, definitely Mission Impossible. Rogue Nation is out there, and strangely enough, I have kind of run into a group of people on IO9. I thought I was kind of alone in the world, still liking Mission Impossible movies, but there's a good chunk of people on IO9 who have today I discovered are just as much fans as I am. You know, Tom Cruise's personal shenanigans withstanding. Like it's one of those movies, and the trailer just makes it look really fun and crazy, and he's doing his crazy, aerial stunt stuff again, and it's got Simon Pegg, and so that's just. And the last one was so good. Like Brad Bird's Ghost Protocol was so good. So it's going to be one of my highlight movies this summer. And then I'm just.
Well, now surely Bird didn't do this one, right?
No. So the whole idea with Mission Impossible since the beginning is every one you'll find a different director, so that stylistically it'll have a different feel to it. However, when J.J. Abrams directed 3 back in 2006. He stayed on after that as producer. So the 2006 and then Ghost Protocol and then it looks like this one all kind of feel like they're part of the same thread. And I think that's largely because of J.J. Abrams, and I think they're using a lot of the same crew and stuff. Or as far as I can tell, it just kind of feels it's more cohesive that way, even though different directors kind of navigating the details a little bit differently. But I don't know. I'm a huge when you remove the second one from the equation, I love the franchise, and I'm kind of waiting for the day when Tom Cruise's character Ethan Hunt becomes the villain, and that's how he exits the franchise. Because the first one, '96, was so the '96 one was based on the TV series,
right?
And Jim Phelps was in the first movie, and actually they approached the original guy who played Jim Phelps in the TV series to reprise that role in the movie. I forget that gentleman's name. I apologize. And then he didn't want to be the bad guy, so that's when they brought in Jon Voight to play Jim Phelps. And then Jim Phelps, spoilers at this juncture, if you haven't seen Mission Impossible, it's the first one 20 years ago. Jim Phelps ends up being the bad guy at the very end, and it's kind of, and it was sort of like one of those like how can that be? He was the hero of the series. So for Ethan Hunt to become the bad guy eventually after all this time is kind of a compelling, interesting thing to me, and they've already sort of gerrymandered Jeremy Renner into it, and he fits in now, and so I feel like there's an ecosystem that can carry on without Tom Cruise if they ever needed it to, but it's kind of become Tom Cruise's only successful vehicle at this juncture too, so I'm sure he's not really ready to exit yet. Anyway, really looking forward to that, and then obviously I'm looking at probably the end of August, early September, Doctor Who comes back in a major way, so. That's everybody's kind of eagerly waiting that first big preview or first big announcement, teaser, trailer kind of thing with all the new footage.
Yeah. So no Terminator Genesis. We established that last week for you. You're not really interested in that.
I mean, if there's a night and I'm just bored and stir crazy and slightly intoxicated or inebriated, then maybe it'll happen. But at this juncture, it'll be an Amazon rental for sure.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I guess I know I'll see it. I will see Ant-Man. I won't see Terminator, but Ant-Man for sure. Possibly Fantastic Four.
Oh, you know what? I am going to see Fantastic Four. I wasn't gonna, but then I keep seeing little recuts of the teaser or the trailer that are compelling to me. The dude from House of Cards is in it,
So is Rooney Mara, right?
So 2 House of Cards alumni.
Wait, not Rooney Mara, Kate Mara.
Kate Mara. I knew who you were talking about, though. Are they related at all?
They are sisters, as a matter of
fact.
fact.
Are they really?
Yes.
They don't look like each other very much, I don't think.
Oh, but they do, I think.
Really?
I think so.
Rooney Mara and Kate Mara are wow. I'll have to go look that up later. So yeah, I'm looking for. I'm not going to see unless Ant-Man just blows everybody away, and it's Guardians of the Galaxy again, and it's just undeniable. Then I'll see it. But at this juncture, that'll probably. I'll wait for your review first, and then.
Okay.
Then we'll see.
I don't think it's going to be Guardians of the Galaxy. But
I'm worried, man. I have seen some interesting things. Marvel's doing some things they haven't done before in promoting their movies, and I wonder if they're not a little nervous about what's going to happen. Like Kevin Feige is making a lot of comments to the press and doing a lot of extra sort of interviews where he's trying to basically justify the movie's existence in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I'm just like that didn't even happen last year with Guardians of the Galaxy. They just kind of let that speak for itself.
Man, I really wonder how Guardians even happened. Like if it just kind of slipped under their radar, and then they saw how good it was, and it was like, well, there's no denying that that's
I
gonna
think they
just
knew it was
rule.
good. I think they knew it was good early on. Otherwise, they wouldn't have put together that
True.
that trailer, that ooga chaka ooga.
Yeah.
You know, that was sort of like when I saw that, I'm like, oh man, these guys. There was a confidence to that marketing campaign that's just like,
Yeah.
I don't see that with Ant-Man. I kind of
I
see
agree.
like a rewash of the Iron Man 1 campaign, where it's kind of like the same kinds of trailer. Like, go on YouTube when you have a chance, if you're listening, or even you, Todd, over Nashville, like, go to YouTube and just go back and like type in like Iron Man 1 trailers, and it's eerily similar. And I just don't know if that's because they don't know what else to do with it, or again, it may be amazing, it may be the best one they've ever done, or the biggest one they've ever done. I don't want to second guess them, but it feels a little different.
Yeah, I agree. I'm curious how it's gonna fit in there.
Anyway.
But I liked Ang Lee's Hulk, so
You poor soul.
definitely not the barometer of how the fans will respond to a movie. Cool. Well, I think that's a pretty good preview wrap.
Yeah.
Talking about what we're doing. Let's jump into the Candy roller coaster.
By the way, I went to an AMC theater for the first time in a year and a half over the weekend, and I saw it again. It was just like, oh my god! And I'd seen it online too, but like, it was refreshing to finally be like, this is the Candy roller coaster. Here it is. Da-na-na-na-na-na-na. And product placement popping up around you as you. And it's just like, yeah, there it is.
And then please turn off your phones. Again.
Like
added that to the end.
It still has the 80s guitar and the synth music and everything. I love it. They must just have that same track, and then just every year they tweak it a little bit with new product sponsors and that kind of stuff. Anyway, what's on your list this week?
Well, and it's funny because we covered this in the Lost episode, or I did, and you've got some new stuff this week. So these are my picks of stuff, and as you know, and maybe eagle-eyed readers of my blog know, that I am on quite a kick of movies in the genre that I refer to as Magic Ninja movies.
Magic Ninja, yes.
So
Yes.
I have, it's one of those things that's the beauty of Netflix, where you some nights you just can't find anything to watch, and then once you watch that one weird movie that totally fits your tastes, all of a sudden Netflix has 100 of them, and you're like, where have these been? So first of all, this was not a Netflix movie, my first pick, but I saw it on HBO, so it's on HBO Go right now.
Or now.
HBO Now, yeah, that's the one I have, which is 47 Ronin, starring Keanu Reeves, which claims to be an actual Japanese legend about these 47 samurai who lose a master and sort of, wander the countryside and enact revenge for their master, and restore honor to their, to house, whatever it is. So it's just, we looked it up when we spoke about this a couple weeks ago in our Lost episode, and found out, was it the second worst movie? Like, it was like this thing lost like hundreds of millions of dollars. It wasn't even like we'll make it up in foreign markets or something. Like, this thing got destroyed.
Yeah, it kind of set Keanu Reeves back. Was that and I forget too, is it a Warner Brothers movie? Because if it is,
I don't even remember. But it's fantastic.
Yeah.
And I had read a review right before. Well, no, sorry, I read a review when the movie was in the theaters, and that review said this thing is like, it's gonna die a horrible death in the theater. They just knew like it's not gonna make any money, but it's great. It's fantastic. That's how I recall this review. I never got a chance to see it in the theater because it didn't last very long. So when it showed up on HBO, I was very excited. It has Keanu is fantastic in it. He plays, I believe they refer to him throughout the movie as the half-breed, which you might think is like half Japanese, half American, but it's or half English, but it's, which is true, except that you also find out that he's also kind of half of this, magic cult of people.
Oh, I didn't know. See, when you said that last time, I only thought that you meant racially half-breed, because I'm like, and I thought, that's a little terrible on the nose, because Keanu Reeves is sort of, he straddles ethnicities pretty well, if I recall. His what is he? I think he was Canadian, and I think his mother or father was from the Philippines, if I'm not mistaken. So it was kind of. I was a little. Well, the reason I say this is because when you said last week, I was like, wow, they're really just going there, aren't they? Cause,
right.
But no, it's
we cast that guy because of the yes. No, but so it's it's just so well done, and it's
Nice.
shocking because we also found out when we looked all this stuff up that the director, I guess, wasn't really known for doing anything. I think on IMDb he had one other credit, and it was like a student film or an indie film or something. But it's really well done. Like that part of the plot is not overplayed. You just get hints. I mean, you just understand. Well, there's a subtext there, which is that he's part of this kind of secret group that,
Is he one of the 47 Ronin? Is he number 44?
There's only there's nothing in the movie, in the dialogue, in the text, you would say, that talks about the number 47. So there's no like magic number there. It just happens that there are these 47 that the Emperor, of course, has ordered them not to seek revenge on this other house, the clan that's wronged them, and they do. So there's only one moment where they're like all signing the roster and saying, we're pledging our lives to this cause, and that's when you're aware that like there's a great number of them.
There's not like some cheesy scene where they're like, 46 of us, and then all of a sudden Keanu Reeves is like, Keanu Reeves is like, no,
I will
47.
also carry 2 swords.
He signs it. Like, he signs his name the biggest of all. He's like, Kai, and I'm going down 47. It's like, well, okay. Hey, you remember last time, and I forget, the trailers I saw, I mean, it looks gorgeous. Like, that was the one thing it had, from my standpoint, it had going for it was just that it looked very well designed and shot. There was a lot of magical kind of elements, though, in it. Are those subtle, or are those a crucial part of the storyline?
They are, I would say, crucial.
Okay.
It is, but it's not overdone.
Okay.
So, yeah, I mean...
So it doesn't feel like a video game where you have to, like, beat bosses and stuff.
It's, it's kind of funny that this is sort of the standard by which to judge things, but it's very Game of Thrones-ish in that way.
Wow.
When some magic occurs, it's like, oh, holy shit, we're seeing some magic. Like there's sort of a moment of like, but it's also done in this great way where the characters don't necessarily react to it that way. So you're aware that they live in this magical realm where this is something these Ronin would run across.
Okay.
So that's
cool.
such a cool experience where it's not, where the effect isn't, kind of trying to blow everything away. It's just the thing that happens.
Because that can I could see in this kind of movie that becoming kind of too distracting or too much.
Exactly.
So I'm glad that that's not the case.
I really, I get that it's a certain type of itch that this kind of movie is going to scratch, but I just loved it. It was, it's just, I love like big, movies like that with just that widescreen feeling of like there's this huge world that they're walking through, and it's just and that mixture of what's magical and what's not, and the kind of hints of mythical creatures and magic and dragons, and plus there's tons of swordplay, and it's just like really amazingly choreographed, like huge battles. I mean, just like the 47 Ronin against hundreds of other samurai. Is
it 300-ish in that regard? Is there like the slow motion, like kind of Zack Snyder-y sorts of stuff, or is it really does it feel like an actual battle that would have actually occurred?
That is a good question. It is very actual battle, and I think one of the reasons it appeals to me so much is when I was a kid, I went hard on so many ninja movies, American Ninja 1, 2, 3, whatever whatever those, like all those Shokusiji movies there were, and I was slightly into Bruce Lee. He was kind of like before my time, and but I just those. Oh my God! I wish I wish I could Google this faster. But the Shokusiji movies that I'm trying to recall, this has that same feel of like this is what I would imagine a Japanese movie about, with samurai is like. Revenge of the Ninja. That's right. Enter the Ninja, and Revenge of the Ninja, and Ninja 3: The Domination. Who's also in the Bad News Bears Go to Japan? Who knew?
Wait, that's a thing? That's a real thing?
I guess so.
What? That was back in the 80s when that did happen. Like I remember Karate Kid 2 was like, well, let's go to Japan now. And like that just kind of seemed to be the like when you ran out of storyline, like, well, it's the same. Let's go. I am surprised, honestly, I'll say this, and I think it's only because it happened in 1992 and not 1988, but we almost probably saw Home Alone 2 Escape from Osaka or something like that at some point.
That would have been amazing. He's just in like a 200-story like luxury hotel, and he thinks he's been left alone, but his parents have just gone to dinner on the 97th floor or something.
I love it. And somehow, for some random reason, Harry and Marv are there too. Just like, we escaped the country, Harry. It's like, we're here. There's that kid. And then all of a sudden, like, he's throwing sushi at him and using chopsticks in creative ways. Anyway,
so Macaulay, Shokusiji, but it had that feel of like, it's just so good. It just reminded me of all the good stuff I liked about samurai movies.
That's great.
So yeah, I'll wrap that up and make the next two really quick. So on that journey, then the first one that got me started on this was on Netflix. Just randomly recommended a movie called White Haired Witch to me, which is I believe Chinese. And it was a little more magical than 47 Ronin for sure. And it was definitely that. It was a style, it was a type of film, like a genre that I don't know because it's it is this Chinese film. It probably fits into a whole genre of its own over there that is not called magic ninja movies. But I like the sword play. I like the little bits of magic, and it had a lot of the wire fighting style.
Wait, when did this come out? Was it early, like late 90s? Was it?
No. White-Haired Witch is last year, 2014.
Oh, so it's okay. It's not John Woo or anything, obviously.
No.
I know he didn't invent that style. I just that's kind of who you normally think of when that's said.
Yeah, it's all. I mean, that's just the thing. I think in Chinese movies, and it's. I don't know. It's just great, and it's set like sort of in, that imperial time, whatever it is, and the magic in it is, besides the sort of characters able to lift themselves off the ground and sort of fly from one level of a fortress to another and fight. There's really not magic. It's not like a Avengers or something, where there's people have superpowers. The titular character, the white-haired witch, has that moment where she has to call on this dark magic that she's learned and really make a choice to use it and kind of demolish her enemies. And it was a very cool movie. I watched that 47 Ronin I kind of checked into and checked out of. It took me a couple of passes to get through the whole thing. But White-Haired Witch, I was there like the whole time.
So I assume White-Haired Witch it's obviously all subtitled.
Yes.
Does it get hard to pay attention to that and I guess the fighting sequence stuff, or does it usually happen? I mean, do they force both at you at the same time?
What a great question, because it leads into the next pick, which was in White-Haired Witch. It was really well done. Like, it was easy to read and keep up with the story, because the story's kind of crazy anyway. So you could kind of hit the beats of it, the main points, and in the subtitles, and still not miss the action. But then so because I watched that, Netflix suggested I watch Young Detective D: Rise of the Sea Dragon, which is another Chinese film, another Magic Ninja movie. No,
wait, Rise of the Sea, that suggests there are other Detective D movies.
There are other Detective D movies, which have now shown up in my Netflix queue. So I'm very excited about those. But I learned tonight when I Googled it that I guess the lead actor was replaced.
Oh, okay. So, was this the first one, or was this further along in this?
I thought this was the first one. But I can't tell because in the Wikipedia description of it, it calls it a prequel. Wait, maybe if I find the release date. Oh, yes. So it did come out second, but it is a prequel, I guess, explaining how he joins the police and wherever they are. So it is opposite of White-Haired Witch in that the subtitles come very quickly. They're very long. There's tons of story to read, and it like flashes by so fast you don't even have a chance to read the whole sentence before the next sentence is appearing. And the storyline is just fucking crazy. So it's not like this one. It was even. I mean, 47 Ronin. When I say I checked in and out, it was more like I watched part of it over lunch, and then I watched part of the rest of it that night.
Okay.
Detective D took me like a week to finish. It's like an hour and a half long. So I kind of barely know what the story is. I ended up going back and rewatching bits of it, but when it so this detective, the character in this he's as you might have guessed, a real good detective, and he, at least at the beginning when he's sort of putting clues together, they do this very cool visual style, which is almost like the opening credits to Game of Thrones, where he'll sort of envision the city and he'll see all the buildings sort of rise and where the crime happened and where the person he's chasing is, and it gives it this really cool style.
No, wait, when did this come out? Is this recent too?
2013. Yeah.
Okay.
And it's so he. Then that's kind of the first half of it, almost, I would say, are these sort of detective powers, where he's the outsider and the police force doesn't really accept him, even though he has this letter of recommendation that none of them can understand how he got it, because he's so insubordinate and stuff like that. And then there's just some pretty quickly they find a sea monster, which is pretty weird. and you're like, well, I guess that's a sea dragon. And it's just kind of like a guy in like a swamp thing costume. And I remember, when that happened, I was like, well, it's kind of a downer, but I like all the other effects. That's whatever. It's, it's not supposed to be the Chitauri or whatever, coming down out of the sky. It's just one dude.
Yeah.
But it turns out that's not even the dragon. So there's this whole sort of like subplot of this one guy that's gotten infected with this parasite that's turned him into this sea creature, and he's in love with the princess from the other clan, and they it's so that whole detour is kind of strange. They eventually meet up with the clan of gangsters who are trying to overthrow the emperor, and then at that point the actual sea dragon makes an appearance, and it is really badass. And all the fighting in that last sort of third of the movie is there were just incredible like sword fights of combining digital effects and the wire fighting, and just these cool shots of it must have been made for 3D, because there's so much like head-on action where like a million throwing stars come at a guy, and his sword sort of multiplies in his hand so that there's 20 swords that can deflect all of the throwing stars and stuff like that. And
do you think that's why they threw the dude in the suit at you at first? Because you're like, oh, we'll get your expectations lower, and then we'll show you the dragon for real, and it'll just knock your socks off even more. Or do you think that?
Well, it's so weird when you watch a foreign movie that's definitely like in a style. You'll go on one of those detours, and my kind of American instinct is always to go like, well, that's a terrible way to tell a story.
Yeah.
But you're right. Like maybe there is sort of a mythology that I don't understand, which is like there's always kind of a false. But honestly, that's what a detective story is too, which is there's always like a false conclusion, right in the middle of it, and the detective's like, wrap things up here, and then it gets crazy.
Yeah.
So yeah, that last third of it was just like thrilling. It was just so awesome. There's a giant sea dragon. There's like this huge battle where ships are getting destroyed. There is a horse that runs on water. I know that's a spoiler, but it's amazing. And it went out like the movie went out like in the best possible fashion.
Nice.
Like I was so.
It's always satisfying. So then, are you going to watch the rest of the D saga
definitely.
when you have a chance?
I'm definitely going to watch this Mystery of the Phantom Flame, which is I think that's the other one that Netflix has. So, and I've since added like a bunch. I think we talked about this last time, where I went through the Netflix thing and just was sort of watching 10 minutes of all these Japanese and Chinese movies, establishing that there was actually no magic, and then just turning them off.
Nice. Wow.
Like people would just actually get heads cut off and stuff, and I was like, nope, not for me. Where's the one where they fly around? And
yeah. Interesting. I wonder if that's like if much like Mission Impossible, there was like a different director. Or they're like, hey, we're going to go in this direction this time, so that they kind of keep it varied. Wonder how that is. And you said too, there's a different. So how many do you think there are? Like 4 or 5?
Of Detective D?
Yeah.
Well, just given what I read on Wikipedia, I'm guessing there's really only the 2.
Oh, okay.
Because the first one was 2010, and and the next one's 2013.
Okay.
I think that's the first one in 2010.
Interesting. I wonder how long it's going to be before they start to like. And I would rather they not adapt stuff for an American audience. I wish those things just are what they are and you like them as they are. But I wonder if some producers isn't going to be like, hey, you know what we need to do? We live in a bonkers world where Mad Max and Kingsman both exist and do great business. We should start taking these bonkers Japanese or Chinese or just Asian American or Asian Pacific movies and put I hate to say this, but put white actors, basically Americanize them but keep the bonkers elements in place.
Right. Well, I kind of think that that's what 47 Ronin was sort of doing. At least when I watched it kind of in the middle of this, series of movies, and my impression at the time was, I bet this director is familiar with this sort of style of Japanese movie.
Sure.
Even though these other two are Chinese, but this is probably how a magical samurai movie is shown in Japan.
True,
and
true.
he's turned it into an Americanized version of that. Only so I really wonder if that's why it didn't connect or something. Maybe that was the failure where everyone's like, ooh, third rail, we're not going to touch that idea for a while.
Yeah.
And I really hope they don't because. I remember whenever the first like Jackie Chan movie was that really crossed over, like Rumble in the Bronx or something, and it was still one of the Hong Kong movies that had been terribly like overdubbed, and and then they subsequently released probably all these other movies that had been in the can or like been in the Hong Kong theaters before, and I loved all those, and then we started getting the American versions of those Jackie Chan movies, and I hated all those. So I'd like to think that I've found this little niche that I can just do a deep dive into and enjoy them all.
Well, it's great that
like,
Netflix is kind of they have it all there too for you. Like it's cool that they can.
Yeah, if they would just have magic ninja movies like as a category.
And that's a whole other discussion for another day. Netflix's categorization and just organization is really inadequate. And I wish they had. I wish there was tagging. I wish you could create custom tags and basically like Evernote Netflix in a way that makes sense to you, or create your own channel. That's bizarre to me too. I mean, I know the queue has kind of become like a playlist in that regard, but I wish, because what I want to see, and this is I'll try not to veer off this too far, but like it's too bad that I can't say, give me a 24/7 channel based on these things, and then you can just flip on Netflix whenever you want, and it could be midway through something that has just like regular TV, and you can stop it and rewind it back to the beginning if you want to see it, all the rest, but just catching you in those moments where you're like, what's this? And then jump back through. It's and anyway, that's a whole other discussion.
No, I mean, as a veteran of Blockbuster Video, one of the franchise stores that had the billion different categories, I totally have such insight on that.
Interesting.
Having when I had to explain to customers like, I see where you're going, sir, but it's not in thrillers. It's actually in our specific James Bond category.
But see, that was in a time where you could only have one movie in one category. Now you could have a movie with the file can have multiple.
Yeah, sure. Our taxonomy the digital space has allowed us to cross tag things like that.
Which would be great. So, I wonder if that's just. I wonder if that is a carryover, because they're like, and just people who are programming Netflix like, well, this is how it was, and.
I always see Netflix, especially because the app is what I use most of the time, and I hate that I can't reshuffle my queue.
Oh yeah,
in that.
yeah.
And so I always see it as based on the original Netflix business of sending the DVDs to your home.
Sure.
Like they're still in that queue mentality of you're going to watch them in this order. And I'm like, no, these are just bookmarked. Well, they're not actually in an order for me. It's not a queue for me.
Yeah.
These are just bookmarked.
These are things I want to see. These are my playlist of stuff I want to see.
Right, because I can't ever find them if I don't bookmark it.
It's weird that they have. I mean, they clearly have. I mean, they make their entire programming decisions based on data. It's weird that they haven't gone, oh, this is how people are. They're keeping stuff in their queue for 3 years at a time, because that's like, that's what it. Maybe we should change it. Like, it's weird that they haven't come to that conclusion yet.
It's true. I assume they're getting there.
Yeah.
Like the updates kind of roll out.
There's probably some programmer somewhere who, if he listened to this, is like, "Do you guys have any idea how hard that?"
I know.
It's like, just move it, just change it. It's like, oh sure, Yeah, it's like we have to. That's a whole
we
development.
are the we are our own worst clients or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, oh, it's easy.
We have become our nightmare clients, I guess is what it is.
You guys can do it tonight. Like, all right.
Yeah.
Whatever you say. Well, I've got a couple picks. Some of these are carryovers, just like yours from the Lost episode, but it's more apropos now because the comic series, one of the big series I'm reading right now, of course, by Image, is a series called The Wicked and the Divine. And Volume 2 has just wrapped up, and they're actually putting out the Volume 2 trade paperback July 2nd, I believe. And I have not read any of the Volume 2 stuff because I picked up Volume 1 when I was in Portland back in April. And I was like, what is this amazing thing? And then kind of have kept away from it because I wanted to read Volume 2 in one sitting. But I got so anxious when I was in the store 2 weeks ago. I picked up the last issue of Volume 2 and read it and was like, holy shit! And so I really want to see it. It's almost better that I did that because now I know how Volume 2 is going to end. I want to see how the hell we got to that. Like, it's almost like we're going to Tarantino this and figure out how we got to that point. And it's going to be even more exciting when I come back to that again and be like, this is, oh God! Because it ends on such a crazy cliff note with characters that I know from Volume 1, but to understand how the hell that even happened is going to be a fun journey to be on. So
you are Harry from When Harry Met Sally, who always read the end of the novel. Like you saw the first episode of Daredevil and then you just skipped to the end.
Yeah, well,
or you watched a couple and then you skipped to the end. You left out all the middle parts, and you're like, I can't wait to see what happens because the end.
I don't
the
do
end
that
is
all
amazing.
the time. I don't do that all the time. I do that only when either in the case of Daredevil, I'm like, do I want to invest? Because if it involves binging or involves a big chunk of, like, this is 10 hours of my life. Am I going to be disappointed? Like, I'm so paranoid after Lost. I'm like, does this make, so I'm like, okay. And then now the journey of getting there is going to be fun. And knowing too, like, as you're watching that journey, like, oh God, this is where we're headed, and this is going to lead to that, and it almost makes it better for me in some ways. And then if it's not that, I just get super duper anxious because I'm like, well, I don't want to go buy every issue. I want the TP. But I really want to know what's going on, so I'll jump in, and I do it sparingly. But when I do, it's every once in a while. I'll do it, and I'll get burned because then it just removes the, there's a twist at the very end. So I'm very careful. I understand, but that's anyway.
Well, and that's kind of how I feel about Chew. Like I always, it's so difficult to wait for the next collected volume, and because one of the volumes really drove me crazy. And it was like. Yeah. And then after that one, it was like, I'm sure if I'd been reading the single issues, it would have been, I would have kept up with it. I would have been like, no problem. But after this, I can't remember which volume it was, where I thought like, the story's kind of off course. I don't like this. I waited a while to pick up the next TPB, but when I did, it was like so rewarding, because it sort of tied up those ends. And so if I'd snuck ahead, it would have reassured me, but it didn't. So.
Yeah. It's sometimes a leap of faith. Because again, when you're especially a trade paperback is essentially binge watching a season of shows, just a little shorter. So you don't want to I don't want to invest the time if I'm going to be disappointed, and B, I don't want to, if I love this thing already, I don't want to suddenly retroactively have buyers or fan remorse, if you will, for where they're headed. And it's just there's all these kinds of things you want to keep balanced. So it's just one of those things. Anyway, go out and grab it if you're a fan of anything Image. It's a fantastic little fantasy sort of drama around a series of teenagers who are basically reincarnated gods, and I think we discussed this in one of our last Image fan episodes.
Yes.
But they come back to Earth. Every I think is it every 90 years? I forget all of a sudden. They're reincarnated again, and then once they can be real people who then are once they manifest as gods, there's sort of a transformation that occurs, and they're imbued with all the memories and powers of that god while still sort of remembering their real life. But then once that happens, they have 2 years to live, and then they die. And so you're dropped into the latest incarnation, and there's a murder mystery, and you get to kind of see how these gods live out in the public, and they're pop stars, so there's some of that element to it. But the murder mystery thing kind of kicks into high gear, and it really starts to it's amazing. They're making a TV show out of it too, so it'll be fun to see how they cast it. So definitely grab that. Another comic series I'm reading right now, also by Image, is one called No Mercy. And it's super fun because it is this. I shouldn't even say. I don't even want to say too much. And I wish they didn't telegraph there's a twist right in the first issue that happens that they telegraph right on the front cover, and I wish they hadn't, because if they hadn't done that, it would have blown me away even more. But even if you're reading it through, the pacing, the drama is amazing. But it's about these kids, these sort of overprivileged. I think it's like late high school, early college kids who are on this bus trip into Mexico to do some volunteer work essentially, and it goes through all the culture of millennials. And just what they, what you see, and so a lot of the dialogue blurbs are like text messages and tweets and Facebook posts and all this kind of stuff. And then something happens about midway through the first issue that just takes the whole story in a completely different direction. And all I'm going to say is that these kids have to survive in a major way, and it just goes. It goes from this like fun little like, these kids are going to go and help build the school or whatever it was that they're going to do, and then all of a sudden it changes into something completely different. It's not sci-fi. It's not. It is purely grounded, real stuff. But it's just so.
Huh.
It's just so. And I love. I mean, the art is cool. It's sort of. It's drawn very storyboard, very episodically, so it feels like you're almost like watching a show. So grab that one. They're on issue 4 now, I believe, of No Mercy.
Well, and that's always so interesting when a comic book does real life.
Yeah.
And not superpowers or sci-fi or something like that.
Well, and I had to make sure I had to go to because I caught this and I just grabbed it kind of on the off chance that because the art looked different and cool, and I was like, this might be fun. And I kind of flipped through the first few pages. I'm like, oh, this is kind of a different thing. They're really trying to show you the millennial communication method here. And then I saw the twist. I was like, oh god, I got to keep this. But then I was kind of concerned. I'm like, is there some alien or some demon going to show up? Because that's gonna. But it doesn't. It's just very. What would happen if these kids who depended on technology no longer had that anymore?
So it's kind of a Lord of the Flies thing going on.
Yeah, Lord of the Flies meets Castaway meets The Hatchet, if you remember reading The Hatchet as a kid.
Oh, God, no, I didn't.
Pretty cool. And then my other one, and this is a new one. A friend gave it to me as a book over Christmas, and I'm a big Kindle fan, so Kindle finally had it for $4. And I grabbed the book Ready Player One. And I'm a little late to this because this came out a couple years ago and everybody else has read it. But I started it last week, powered through it, and finished that yesterday, actually, and was very, very satisfied. It was given to me as a gift because I love all things 80s, and my friend thought that I would love all the 80s references. That was the one thing that bothered me the most. Was all the heavy. I mean, it was so overbearingly heavy-handed in all the references that eventually I just had to start fast-forwarding through. Once I kind of got into the rhythm of how long it takes him to, ramble on and on and on about how much he loves movies and things, I kind of just started fast-forwarding through because it really stood in the way of the story at one point. And then eventually, after about I would say once he got 3/4 of the way through, like the last fourth of the book. And it's fun. Kindle always gives you can look at page numbers, but I always use the percentage thing. So once I hit 75%, the rest of the book was like almost pure story and was incredibly satisfying.
So what's the basic plot of it? How does it take place in the 80s?
So you haven't read it, correct?
No.
Okay, so it's future.
And I'm only aware of it in that I've seen the title appear in sort of from sort of geek blogs and stuff like that.
Well, they've greenlit the movie. Spielberg is directing it, and it's the licensing implications I can't even imagine. Warner Brothers is probably going to spend 2 years just on that alone. But it's a future dystopian book, so it takes place about 15 or 20 years from now. Oil has ran out, and society is kind of pre-Mad Max, kind of starting to sort of collapse. There's a lot of strife and stuff. And in the middle of this, it's basically around this time, around the mid-20 teens, virtual reality has become really, really, really good. And it's weird because what Microsoft is doing with their VR stuff and what Oculus is kind of trying to do too. Like, we're almost there now, but there's this company that kind of emerges, like a very Apple-esque company that builds this thing called the Oasis, which is this virtual reality platform, if you will, that you can create worlds on and characters and stuff. So over the course of 15 or 20 years, this Oasis has existed and has become like this global obsession. So what people do on their phones and on the internet now, everybody will do in this virtual world then. It's kind of the ultimate realization of what Second Life wanted to be, but just was way too ahead of its time. Like the technology and just the immersive kind of stuff wasn't there yet. So this shows you like virtual worlds and ultra high def photorealism. There are like things like haptic suits and gloves that give you like a really good sense of being there. People invest in these giant rigs that help them like even like walk around in 3 dimensions and stuff. So it drops in on this character named Wade, who's this high school kid who his mom and dad died, and he's living with his aunt in this trailer park, and they stack all the trailers on top of each other into these towers to save space because everybody's migrating into the cities for work because you just can't travel or drive around as efficiently as you used to. And this whole thing kind of kicks off when one of the original founders, like the Steve Jobs of the company who created the Oasis, passes away and reveals that he has hid an Easter egg in the Oasis. And whoever finds that Easter egg will get his entire. He will will them his entire fortune, his entire control of the company, and basically the deeds to the Oasis.
Okay.
And so like it kicks off this whole global manhunt for this Easter egg, which is very expertly hidden. That goes on for about 4 or 5 years, and everybody kind of just gets bored with it and gives up because nobody has found. There are 3 keys that you have to find. Nobody's found anything, and kind of the novelty's worn off. So it drops into the story right at that time where this kid kind of gives you like some exposition right away. And then he's going to high school, and there's like, there's a whole planet in the virtual world that's like just the high school planet with just copies of these high schools everywhere. And then shortly, I would say maybe a fourth of the way in, he discovers the first key. And all of a sudden, the entire world's like, "Holy crap!" This does it, because everybody kind of thought it was a hoax, and there wasn't, or it was just so impossible that no one would ever solve it. He finds the first key, and then everybody comes out of the woodwork, and you find out there's this corporation who also wants to do it, and they're trying to kill him, and trying to find anybody who can help them do it, and it becomes this big kind of geeky thing. But along the way, the guy who hid the Easter egg, like one of the original creators of the Oasis, he made the whole thing about his life and his obsessions, and what he loved because he was a teenager in the 80s is 80s stuff, like late 70s, 80s stuff. So the whole thing is so everybody who wants to go find the key, like there's like an entire subculture of people who devote their time and hobbies and just their lives to finding the Easter egg and finding the keys and everything. So they have to immerse themselves in the lore of this co-founder, and they have to watch all the movies for clues and listen to all the music, and by extension they themselves become obsessed with all this stuff. So this kid Wade, every 2 pages, he's like, I went and found my AC/DC album circa 1978 and listened to and he'll go to, the writer or the author will go to such an extent to describe in vivid detail, scenes from Buckaroo Banzai and Back to the Future that it's amusing at first, but then it just gets really, really tedious. And you're sitting here watching this, you're listening to him describe an escape scene. He's like, and I ran down the stairs and I jumped down to the street and then I pulled out and he spends another 3 pages explaining why the band Rush is so cool. And I'm like, I don't need to oh God. And then it got really bad for me at one point in the book. They more people end up finding keys, and they kind of become big celebrities. So they all go to this dance, and Wade by that point, he's made enough money to afford. Virtual goods in this world are expensive, and actually the company that invented the Oasis makes all their money from everybody trading and buying in the virtual stuff. And so
well,
he buys
in-app purchases.
Exactly. Oh, it's like that taken to its absolute extreme. And so he rolls up on this dance in the virtual world in his DeLorean, which is also part Ghostbusters car, part Kit from Knight Rider, part Buckaroo Banzai car. I'm just like, okay, enough, dude. I get it. I get you love the 80s. I get it. And so you kind of have to. I mean, other people might be less forgiving or more forgiving than I am, but I eventually decided to start fast forwarding through a lot of that reference stuff just to get to the story, which was really compelling. And there are some really cool moments. It ends kind of predictably, but really, really satisfying. If you're a geek at all, or if you have any kind of love for video games or just any kind of thing, if you're a child of the 80s at all, definitely pick this up. And I would say pick it up before the movie comes out, because there are certain things I don't see how they're going to be able to do. They're either going to have to cut it in the movie or consolidate it quite a bit to make it fit. So the book's going to give you kind of that wider swath of good story stuff. But it's just really fun. One of those books, I haven't powered through a book that fast in a while, so that was kind of satisfying too.
Well, that's cool.
Yeah.
And I found out when I Googled it, that this is the guy that wrote Fanboys,
Oh,
the movie.
yeah, I didn't think about that.
Yeah. And also learned that he announced 10 months after it was after Ready Player One was published, that there was an elaborately hidden Easter egg in the book.
Oh, Jesus.
And they gave away a DeLorean to the person who found it and completed an 80s video game quest.
Oh, my God.
That really happened.
Well, when you see how elaborate.
So that's such a great tying together of all the gamification of this, all the levels of gaming in this book.
That makes sense, though. I'm not
really
surprised.
cool.
But when you see in the story how freaking elaborate and ridiculous the quest for this Easter egg is, I can't even imagine what the book itself's Easter egg was, because it's just
God.
And you're sitting here going, because you're trying to, the Wade character is sort of your avatar, and you're a reader's avatar into this world. But as you're going, a lot of times when that happens, you're like, how would I, when confronted with the same choices, how would I react, or what would I do? And you kind of feel like you're connected to that character. Well, there's a point where Wade just gets so freaking geeky with it. You're just kind of sitting there watching him, going, I would just give up at this point. I can't handle this.
It's so at that point you become me playing video games.
Yeah, probably. I'm just like, whatever, man. I have to sit here.
Yeah. Where's the walkthrough? Let me look this up online.
Yeah. Because it's just I would never be. I get why this kid is as obsessed as he is, but I just don't have time. Oh God.
It's like me skipping all the Elvish in Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit.
Yeah. No,
Anytime they sing a song, I'm just paging through it.
Yeah.
Why would I read this?
Instead of that, imagine now that this character has not only read that, enjoys reading that, but has read it so many times he has every single word memorized, and then every alternate language version of that thing memorized, so he could rattle off Elvish in 10 different variations. It's like, dude, just stop. I don't have time for this.
But in such a way that relates so much to geek culture.
That's
and
true.
And
Yeah.
especially one of our favorite topics, Game of Thrones, and which we'll get into a little bit later. But that idea of where you can just rattle all that off, and I don't know, that's one of the totally creepy aspects of American Psycho, the book, which is in the movie a bit, where he just he'll just go on a 10-page explanation of Huey Lewis and the News's new record.
But you know what though, that yeah.
Well, it's meant to demonstrate what a psychopath and how out of touch this guy.
Well, I had a different
whereas
reaction.
in Ready Player One, it's meant to sort of draw you in and go, yeah, I get that guy.
I love so Bret Easton Ellis. I love his podcast, and I just like that story. I first time I saw that movie, I was kind of like, wait a second, because in high school I was a huge, and I still like them, but I was a huge Huey Lewis and Phil Collins fan. So I'm just like, when he did Huey Lewis, I'm like, oh man, and then when he did Phil Collins, I'm like, man, that would be if I was in that dude's apartment, I'd be like, hell yeah! I'd be all about it.
Turn it up, man.
Instead of fearing for my death, I'd be like, heck yeah! Let's talk about that. I might even win him over.
You would have been the one that yeah, that's what I was gonna say. You befriend him. He takes the poncho off, puts the axe back in the closet.
He sits down.
He's just rock out to sports.
He's like, you're the first person to understand me. I'm like, yeah, man. Of course. Then we just listen to sports and smoke weed the rest of the night. Yeah. And then the stories ended. I convinced him to repent his ways.
Change his ways.
Yeah. Be amazing. And then the end of it's us at a Phil Collins concert, bouncing to studio, and the credits just start rolling.
I love this. I love this alternate American Psycho version that we've come up with.
It'd be amazing. Let's cut it.
Well, that is a great punctuation mark for the Candy Roller Coaster.
Yes, absolutely.
Cool. So that leads us to this week's feature presentation.
Yes.
Which is funny because last week I think it was on last week's show where you just said, let's put a moratorium on talking about Game of Thrones.
Yeah.
Because we were recording it at 5 p.m. on a Sunday or something,
yeah,
and the finale was about to come on. I have not been watching it, partly for the reason you described just now in the when you were talking about Wicked and Divine, how you read ahead and you said it's ever since Lost. I don't want to hold out till the final, season and then have an unsatisfying ending. And I think that's kind of how I'm feeling with Game of Thrones. They just kind of lost my trust this season. And I do feel when they get to that point, whenever it is that Daenerys, however it happens, when those dragons, head to Westeros or whatever, I'll be back in it.
Okay, sure.
But until then, I'm kind of just, keeping my distance. So
you might be waiting a while based on what the finale was. You might be waiting quite a while. I'm really curious where they take it from here, because I think the finale. Do you know anything about the finale? Did anybody?
I know all sorts of stuff about the finale, so just go for it.
Okay,
jump
because
in.
I'm not gonna. I don't have to review it. It was a super collection. I mean, it was crazy because you could tell they're like, oh crap, we set up a lot of stuff, didn't we? All right, here's this. Now here's this. Now here's this. And it was just kind of like this super collection of scenes that were satisfying, but also really confusing. And at the end of the day, set up way more like what's gonna happen now than like remember last season's finale. Episode felt very conclusive. It almost felt like it could have just ended the series in a lot of ways. I mean, not really, but there was a lot that they ended. Arya basically abandons the Hound and goes off to Braavos, and all these things kind of happen. They're like, okay, and Sansa comes walking down the steps, in the Eyrie with her little like bad girl dress on, and all this stuff kind of happens. It felt very like, okay, we can, the story can pause here.
Yeah.
In this finale, it was very the opposite, where it's like, what the hell? What happened there? What? And it just kind of kept. I mean,
basically every character's storyline ended on a cliffhanger.
Yeah.
And I mean, we can't not talk about it. Let's just, Jon Snow gets stabbed.
Yes, which is something that happens in the books, which I knew was coming.
Okay, so that's the thing. You'd alluded to this several weeks ago, that you knew some things that were going to come. And I didn't think it would happen this season.
Really?
But once the hard home happened, it was like, oh shit.
Yeah.
But I mean, I give Game of Thrones a lot of grief for now how we expect the unexpected.
Yeah.
But it's true that for 2 seasons, maybe even 3, we could argue, you knew that the 9th episode was going to be crazy.
The Ned's Head.
Yeah. That was always the Ned's Head episode. It was the Red Wedding was in the 9th episode. The battle for Blackwater Bay was in the 9th episode. It was like, that's the big one.
Yep.
And they definitely have shaken that up the last 2 years.
Yep.
So,
yep.
Which is good to know. I mean, so you knew that was coming.
Yes.
Did you realize in that scene, like when you were watching it, did you realize like, oh, that's about to happen?
I did. Well, because I knew it would probably be different than it was in the books. Long ago, I Wikipedia'd a good chunk of the books because we were in between seasons. I'm like, what's going to happen? And I was more curious too, like what did the books lay out? Because I knew they had started to cut characters and things. So I'm like, what are we missing? So I came across that, and then all the fan theories involving that and everything. So I knew it was coming, and I'm like, it's got to happen. I honestly thought it would probably happen in episode 9 and not 10 because of and I thought if it happens in 9, then maybe they end the season with the answer of what happens to Jon. Like, is he really dead? Does the Melisandre do something to him? Like, I thought that would be the cliffhanger.
Poor you.
Yeah, well, and so it's like so that it happened. I thought the way they did it in the show made more sense than the way it happened in the books. Because they've been building and escalating this whole like Night's Watch is not very happy with Jon Snow thing. Even his little manservant Ollie's been like just giving him the evil eye, the stink eye for a while. So when Ollie ends up being the one, spoilers, that like betrayed, basically is his Judas, so to speak, and brings him out to be killed. Like that was kind of the moment where I'm like, as soon as he walked out there, I'm like, oh man. And so it's just shot really well, executed really well. Pun intended. So yeah, that was cool. What I did not expect, and what was a total there were 2 big things that were total like, what? One, and this is not a book thing, so there's no way to see this coming. Theon and Sansa decide to just jump off the freaking Winterfell wall to what looks like certain doom.
Right.
And especially because we had in episode 1, season 1, freaking Bran fall off a similar height, and everybody thought he might have died, and he lost the use of his legs. So I'm like, here they are, and they made it a point to show you, like the camera kind of panned up the wall. You're like, look how high they are. And oh, by the way, we just pushed somebody else off the wall like 2 seconds ago, and she completely died. So even though these guys are jumping into what looks like snow, it's probably not going to end well for them. And Sansa just made this whole point about saying, if I'm going to die, if this is just going to keep getting shitty for me, I'm going to at least go out on my own terms. So it was kind of like one of those moments of like, well, here we go, Reek. And by all accounts, they probably died. I mean, I'm sure they didn't, but like it left you basically thinking, oh, well, they jumped to their death. I don't know how else this could end.
Well, what a terrible end to Sansa's story.
Exactly.
Like, she doesn't get to exact any revenge on any of her captors or tormentors.
Other than I'm taking myself out
Miranda
of the equation
or whatever.
Ha, ha, ha,
or
ha.
yeah. Ugh.
You know. So if that ends up being true, I might quit watching the show because it'll just be like, I don't know what. I mean, they left it. They left it in one of those ways where like you didn't see them land. You didn't. They kind of they jumped past the camera and the camera just kind of stayed where it was, and you never heard like anything else. So by all accounts, they're still alive. There's gonna be some wackadoo explanation for how they survived or what happened to them.
Sure.
And it might even be such that both of them broke a leg or something. They get hauled back into the castle for more torture, and then it's going to be just even worse.
You had one more point. I don't know if it was about Sansa or just the episode in general. But
yeah, so
hit it.
So Sansa and Theon or Reek rather, or kind of my one sort of WTF moment. My other one, which isn't as obvious, and the one I kind of bitched about on Facebook was this whole season, and you may have dropped out for some of this, but this whole season Peter Baelish has been kind of going behind the scenes, and he was summoned to King's Landing after he hooked Sansa up with the Boltons, and Cersei's like, you better go take care of both. Stannis is coming, and the Boltons are acting out. Like, go back, take care of both of them. And he's like, I'll go back to the Eyrie and bring my army, and we'll, basically promising to put a rest to all that. And secure Sansa for her, even though I'm sure that's not what he really wanted to do. So I had every notion that what we're going to see is Stannis going to attack Winterfell, the Boltons kind of rallying their troops, and then all of a sudden, like frickin' Theoden and the riders of Rohan, the soldiers of the Vale were going to come storming down and just wipe both of them out and take Winterfell and install Sansa as the Wardeness of the North. And that would be like the moment you're like, holy crap, this, even though Sansa went through a bunch of bullshit, she's got a whole region now to govern, and now it's on to her. I was so convinced, even to the point where they showed Stannis, they showed his, what remained of his army after most of them abandoned him after his batshit crazy burning of his daughter. Like, they showed him rallying his men together, and then they're like, I don't think we're going to have a chance to do this after all. And they show in the distance the massive amount of guys on horses coming towards them. I'm like, oh, it's them. It was the Boltons. And I'm like, okay. And then Littlefinger wasn't mentioned once. The Vale never showed up. I don't know where they are. And I was just kind of like, really? After all that? Like, it would have been incredibly satisfying or even interesting. And more importantly, it would have satisfied the story thread you set up for Baelish for that to happen, and it would have given all the people who were so fed up / sad / frustrated by what happened to Sansa some closure, and that she's got something to do now. That's not just be tortured, she's got some vindication finally. None of that happened at all. So I was just kind of like, okay, and that really sort of, I was so expecting that. That to not have it happen it was really kind of a big letdown. And then I read your blog post. I'm kind of like, yeah, man, maybe.
Well, the blog post you're referencing is, I swear I'm really not trying to troll. This was just kind of the culmination of the thoughts I'd had over the 6th episode I watched, and then the comments coming from talking to you and my girlfriend and everything that had filtered in, and
Pardon me.
And I read this article on The Verge by A.D. Robertson called "Game of Thrones Became Its Own Worst Enemy, and I Need to Let It Go." Mm-hmm. And I went, yeah, and I kind of synthesized all that, and I thought, and I think we've brought this up. Maybe we didn't bring it up on the podcast before, but I find myself with this question of like, well, is Game of Thrones actually any good, or is it? Is it like like a horror movie where people are addicted to the kind of adrenaline rush of surprises? Mm-hmm. And I guess what's so, part of it is me trying to examine, like, Jesus Christ, I've spent so many hours, invested in this show, and I'm not I'm not. I don't fanboy like that.
Yeah,
You know.
yeah.
So it's weird to me that I kind of resisted it when my friend Meg told me to read the books. She was reading the first one. She said you'll enjoy it, and I was like, I don't really like. I haven't read fantasy literature in a while that I've liked. And she said, no, it's different. And I gave it a chance and got hooked. And so after reading A.D. Robertson's article and agreeing with this, she describes like a similar thing about reading the books and getting all invested in them, and then finding out that really what she's invested in is not the story but the lore. And she calls herself a lore hound.
Did she Did she get the World of Ice and Fire book then? That is basically just that?
I don't know if this writer did, but my friend Meg does have a World of Ice and Fire. So, I mean, we've talked about that when I had like separate book discussions on my blog. Meg and I it was basically just the two of us commenting back and forth, and so she definitely has that, and but that to me is like such a perfect example of, I guess the argument I make is that some of these things that happen in the how do I want to describe this? It's when I get upset about contradictions between the show and the books, it's a lot of times it's because it's like, no, that's the lore, that's the history of it. And then the other thing is from those books, because there are so many, just hundreds of thousands of pages of like, of different stories in between the cliffhangers in the books, that you lose the story, and you realize, like, I'm just reading lore. All I'm reading is like history that's occasionally exciting, but it doesn't really have a narrative, because George Martin keeps setting up a cliffhanger and then not resolving it for hundreds of pages, or even in that book.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like how Theon just disappears, I think, in book 2, and didn't show up until like book 5 or something, and you're like, by that time you're like, who cares?
Yeah.
Like, I'm not even, as the other really insightful critic I cite in my blog post is the Hulk, in the guise of Film Crit Hulk, who is I don't know who it is, but it's the guy who writes in all caps in the voice of the Hulk, and he made some great points after he read book 5, and that's basically it. Like, I mean, that Theon, he makes this Theon point, which is just absolutely on point. By the time Theon shows back up in the books, because they've waited so long, because Martin has, there's no us or them or whatever, you don't even care that he screwed the Starks over, because at that point the Red Wedding's already happened. Sansa's already married Tyrion, I guess, at that point. It's like, dude, we are so far away from this.
Yeah, well, it's weird
much worse things have happened to the Starks.
From what
now.
I understand too in the books, like, and instead of just kind of cutting that cord loose, he'll double down when you've come back to that character again and introduce like a slew of new characters related to them. It's like, oh no, here's why they're still important. It's
which is the Reek story exactly. It's like, all of a sudden he shows up in these chapters called Reek, and you're going, who is this? And then it's, there's like layers of Reek. Like at one point,
that's right, because they don't reveal it right away in the books, do they?
Right. The chapters aren't called Theon anymore; they're just called Reek, and so it takes you a minute to figure out, like, oh, that's Theon.
Yeah.
And it's so my general argument is, like, when the show follows those cues from the books, it's just getting us lost, and especially after hearing the reactions. Unfortunately, I was kind of writing this, I guess maybe I was writing it before, maybe I'd kind of put some of this together before that finale episode. So when that happened, some of these points that the Hulk makes about, the most, he even says that TV shows, when there's a cliffhanger week to week, it works, but it's infuriating when it's the last episode of the season, you know? And
I don't mind one or two, by the way. I don't mind a cliffhanger that's like, ooh, but as long as it's not, something that requires immediate closure. Because when you come back to that again in the next season, you want to know, but it's the so much time like a year has passed, so it loses its immediacy and it loses its punch unless it's more of a generalized cliffhanger, like like Daenerys rising out of the fire with dragons around her.
Right.
That's a good cliffhanger because
What
you're
a
like,
hook.
you're like, clearly there's gonna be more story involving this, but holy shit, like what? Like that's, and I guess that's not really a cliff. I mean, it is kind of a cliffhanger, in that what's gonna happen now, but it's not so necessary that it requires an immediate. Yeah, I feel like everything we saw last week was, or during the finale was cliffhangers that require pretty immediate follow up. Like it's just gonna be weird to come back a year and be like, oh, that's right, that happened, and you just won't have that sense of needing to. It's like I'm trying to think of a good. I'm not gonna have a good analogy for this, but it's like it's like getting a text message from a loved one. I've been shot, but I'm okay, maybe. And then you don't hear back from them, and a year goes by, and then you see them again, and you're just like, hey, what? You got shot, right? And they're like, yeah, I got it. It was fine. And you're like, oh, so you're curious, but it's just sort of like that. Oh, that happened. That's right. It messes with your head in that way where you don't know, your expectations aren't quite aligned. Do you think though, going back to your blog post and just your thoughts on this, do you think the weaknesses of this season, and probably from the looks of the casting of next season, more or less more of the same, do you think that the weaknesses are because books 4 and 5 were also so sort of disjointed and meandering and just not focused?
Well, I wonder too. So I mean, when you think about it, oh God, another time I should have had this information right in front of me.
Because let me tell you this: the way they're casting next season, what we all assumed was just a jettisoning of the Greyjoy storyline. Looks like it's going to happen next season now, with the Theon's uncle and all of that. Like
Jesus.
I don't know how or why it's going to be as boring and plotting as the
as the books are,
as the Dorne storyline, which I'm like, we could have done without that. Clearly, like we don't need that, any of these things.
Well, you honestly, and I love when we do this because we have like an idea of what we're going to talk about, and then you just made me think of a whole slew of new stuff, which is like, think about it. So one of the things I pointed out in the blog post where I was just rambling at this point was we heard when everyone got into Game of Thrones, we all heard the legend of like, well, George Martin had been approached many times over the years about making this into movies or a movie or something, and he just kept saying, you're not going to, the whole point is this vast world and this long legend, and it's not going to work in a movie.
Yeah.
And when Benioff and Weiss came to him with the series pitch, and they were clear like readers who knew some stuff, like they'd figured out some the parentage of Jon Snow and stuff like that, and he it was like he could trust them with this long thing. So in my blog post, I kind of went, well, let me fantasize for a second about this being 3 movies, and I loved getting into that and thinking like, oh, it'd be so badass if it's like, they're 3 movies that are tied together by the overarching story of, fire and ice, the winter coming and the dragons restoring magic to the world, but also the 3 movies are kind of separated. Like the first one only takes place in Westeros, and we never see Essos, and we never see Dany walking through the desert and all that crap. And then it's only in the second one that you meet Daenerys, and it's like, oh, holy crap, So anyway, I was just kind of fanboying at that point and thinking of that. Anyway, my point being, if we think of that history, when Benioff and Weiss came on and started shooting, Martin would have been pretty far into writing book 5.
Yes,
especially because book 4 and 5 were written at the same time and then split. Well, were started. They, oh God, I don't even know what's.
Well,
the truth
5
is.
came out,
But,
this.
Well, the events take place concurrently.
Sure.
And when book 4 came out, Martin told everyone, like, it may even be in the preface to the book, where he was like, this one was a pain in the ass, and I had to split it into 2 books. So book 4 is kind of like the characters that we all hate.
Yeah.
Because he split it into sort of areas of the world, and then book 5 catches up with those events, like takes place concurrently and then moves beyond them. But anyway, Dance with Dragons came out the same year that season 1 came out. So it's possible that Benioff and Weiss thought, we're going to maybe they thought like, oh, by the time we get to season 4, he's going to be almost done with the next one. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's possible to think like, I mean, maybe he did have some grand outline and he gave it to them, and that's what 4 and 5 are based on. But
I'm
It's also
beginning to.
I mean,
Well, I'm,
but
I'm
maybe
gonna,
maybe they just realized like we're literally out of source material.
I'm gonna
maybe
throw
he's
this
only
at you
given him.
because there was this rumored mythology mythic meeting that he explained the entire storyline to them, and that
Sure.
they know there's a plan and they're gonna get to the same destination and all that. I think that's total horseshit. I think there was a meeting. But I think it's total horseshit in that there is a plan, because there have been several times now where media has come to George Martin and they're like, hey man, the books are starting to do stuff different, and this happened and it didn't happen in your book. And he has said many times, he has even threatened, he's like, well, I'll just have to do it this way so that people don't know what to expect. He's instead of adhering to a plan of any kind, he's just kind of spite writing at this point.
Well, I have heard him make that comment, and also then, like, whether it's in a different interview or something, followed up with he sort of like he understands the problem with that. At least at least from what I read, it seems like he he goes, well, I want to do that so it's unexpected, but I also realize like I shouldn't change things just because people have guessed who John's parents are.
That's something that will stick. But just the events and who he kills off and who lives.
Right.
There's probably three characters. Like if it's Tyrion, Daenerys, and Jon Snow that live at the end, and that's set in stone, that's fine. But there could be like an entire the show could make Peter Baelish king of Westeros, and he could just be like, Peter's dead, in the very next in the very next book. Like that could just be a whole. And I'm thinking like I feel like he's almost inspired to do this just because everybody now, like he went from a world of fans who are like, when's the next book coming out? You better happen soon. Like basically putting him in a misery situation, a Stephen King's misery box, if you will. To now all of a sudden that plus everybody going, hey, on the show this happened, and then the show they're doing this on the show. I can almost see him going, well, you know what? I'm going to do it this way, just so that he doesn't feel even more trapped by this. It's either going to be that, or he's just going to stop. He's going to be like, you know what? This is the last book, and I'm going to wait 20 years before I do anything else. I can't.
Oh my God.
I feel like we're in this weird situation now where the show is still trying. I think a lot of the stuff people are complaining about in this last season of the show is stuff that was clearly in the books. Plotting storyline, or just things. A lot of people, as soon as Jon Snow bit the dust, are like, what? And I'm like, that's a book thing. Like that's clearly a loyal book thing that they. And a lot of that stuff in the finale was very much Arya getting blinded and all this kind of stuff is book stuff. That people didn't like. So now now Benioff and Weiss are in this weird conundrum where they have to. And especially because HBO is breathing down their necks, going, "Hey, man, you guys said 7, but we want 10 seasons." And I think,
oh, really?
Yeah,
I hadn't heard that news.
And there's talks now that they have negotiated. Season 7 will be an AMC kind of a thing where they split it into 2, so it might be
Jesus Christ,
season 7 part
that.
A, and season 7 part B. So it's technically
that's just 2 seasons.
Yeah, really season 7 and 8. So they're doing that while they have to figure out. They're probably going to stall if they're going to bring in the Greyjoys in next season. They're probably stalling to let Grimm put out the next book is either close to done. So they're in this weird spot where they're like, well, we have to still take the useless book stuff that no one likes and invent our own stuff which nobody likes anymore. And I really wonder if we're in this. I'll be really curious to see what the quote unquote ratings are for season 6's premiere in general. Will fans like you in the time off, are fans like you going to rationalize your way back into watching the show full time, or are you just
I don't think I'm ever going to care about it. Whatever, like something would radically have to change for me to give a shit about watching on Sunday nights again, because I'm just sick of watching something on Sunday night that frustrates me so much. And that being the ritual. It's like it's over, and then I sit there for the rest of the evening going like, well, damn it, I got to watch like 4 episodes of Parks and Recreation just to get that out of my head.
I love
feel
how that's
okay
the cleansing,
about the world.
Cleansing the palate, like the comfort food of television.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's watch Chris Pratt bonk around and be crazy.
But I mean that's I don't I just don't even know. I don't get that. Like I don't feel that people abandon it. And it's funny because a lot of the stuff that I read, a lot of the grief, except for the Mary Sue, props to them for sticking their guns and just not covering it. But a lot of the grief I read after the Sansa episode, where people were like, I'm just sick of this. from professional writers covering the show and explaining like this is a terrible, device for, women or however, whatever your feelings are on that. Like all these people griefing about it, but those are still the professionals that get paid to like continue writing about the show. So I kept seeing their reviews every week, so it felt very much to me like I was alone in just turning it off.
Yeah.
Everyone around me was still watching it. So I don't really think that that's a movement to stop watching it. And, I was aware when I wrote that blog post last week, like, well, as part of my motivation, like I'm trying to get people to stop watching it with me so that like we can talk about something else on Sunday nights.
Yeah.
So I don't know, but I think so part of my frustration is I've put all this time in, but the other big part is what we all knew, which is that opening scene of the first book and the first show. Like there was a giant emergency happening.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like there is a climate change cataclysm coming. It wakes the dead, and they're just on the warpath.
Well, and that's why episode 8 was so flipping amazing, because it was that little box of episode 1, book 1, scene 1. It was that little box opened up to an entire like freaking 20-minute version of that. And I think I really hope that they learned from that and learned from like just the pure fan reaction of that scene and go, okay, we've got to start giving them more of this, because this is really the story that people. I mean,
that exactly. That's what people want to see, because that's the big plot. And I, if I wanted to start like rambling about it, there's that is one of the things that bugs me so much about the first Avengers movie, is that the battle at the end is so huge and destructive, and same thing with Man of Steel, honestly. And it's like, but actually what was interesting to us were the characters and stuff, and then you've kind of half-assed this battle at the end that really should have been like the main, thrust of the plot. And like I just hope that Game of Thrones isn't just tacking that onto the end.
Well, what got me really nervous, just in general, was and I think a lot of book readers too are like, what? Because in the books you haven't seen what happens to Stannis' army yet. And it's just sort of alluded to. It's hinted at that Ramsay Bolton, he sends that letter to Jon going, we got Stannis, that's why, that's what causes Jon to leave, to ultimately get stabbed and all that kind of good stuff. In the show, like that scene I was telling you about where the riders of Rohan started approaching from the other side, and the camera kind of zooms back out and shows like the scale of the battle about to take place, and then it does, and you're like, oh my god, here we go. And I'm not even kidding you. It does a Monty Python. Like they should have just had like the freaking. Remember that scene at the end of Holy Grail where they're all like amassing on the hillside, ready to go take out the castle, and at the final second, like a police car shows up and like they arrest Graham Chapman as King Arthur and they take him away and they stop the battle and they're just like, let's get this all out of here. It was basically that, and the reason Monty Python did that is because they didn't have the budget to film an all-out scale battle.
Right.
So it was a really clever, funny, now iconic kind of cheat at the end. Game of Thrones basically did that, and they showed you like this battle about to take place, and then no joke, it jump cuts to the battle is now over, and Stannis is like limping around the battlefield with like maybe a couple extras dead on the ground, and I'm like, so it happened? Like wait, what? Like, and it was very, you're just like kind of, I had to rewind it because I'm like, did my app like glitch and jump ahead and I just missed like 10 minutes of amazing like choreography? No, that's exactly how it happened. I was just like, really?
I was going to ask you about that, in fact, because I wanted to compare it to one of the most frustrating moments of the series to me, which is whatever damn battle it is that Tyrion's in when he meets up with Tywin's army, and he literally gets like clonked in the head as they're going off to battle, and then he comes to being dragged through the battlefield full of dead bodies.
Yeah,
and it's like, I can't believe you assholes built up this huge battle like this.
Although,
and then you just knock him out. Plus, it doesn't give him any credit that he had in the books, which is so frustrating. It's just one of those other things where it's like, man, I know that the viewers already like this guy, but turning him into like a comic moment when in the books, it was like, it's tough.
Yeah.
I mean,
although I'm going to be
he's the half man and he's out there like in a battle fighting people. And maybe he gets knocked out in the books too, because there's a bunch of battles in the books where it just, it's sort of the chapter opens with the army returning or something. And you're like, well, what the hell, man?
I'm going to be way more forgiving about that than you because having not read that in the books, I don't have an attachment to a certain narrative. And the show, Tyrion is your POV character for that moment. And when he gets knocked out, it makes sense for you not to know what happened because he got knocked out. Now, you could say he got knocked out for stupid reasons, whatever. But you get knocked out. It makes logical sense in just the terms of how it's what you're being presented. With Stannis' thing, Stannis is your POV character. So when he sees this giant army coming at you, and then all of a sudden it just jump cuts to him, you're like, we didn't get to see our POV. How did this happen? Like, where did this come from? So it was very like if Stannis had gotten knocked out, or if he had if a giant wind had blown up and you couldn't see what was going on, or I could see maybe it making sense, but it literally cut from him going to no swords clashing, and he's just like, the battle was hard. It's over now. And I'm like, what? How? That could have been an entire. And maybe the justification was we just ran out of time. We just ran out of money. The Hard Home episode took all our budget away. Whatever it was. Then if that's the case, don't even tease it. Just have it happen completely behind the scenes. And we don't even. It's just talked about.
And I wonder honestly too if that would have been a better cliffhanger. Which is just you see that shot and then that's the end of that,
and you never find out until next season. I would have loved that. Then the whole
I wonder about that because as I understand it, as not having watched it, there's another cliffhanger which is did Brienne kill him or not?
Yes, correct.
And it's like, for God's sakes, that doesn't have to be a cliffhanger.
No,
I don't understand why that of all the deaths in the series. And honestly, that's one of those other problems of we now expect the unexpected so much so that, like the Hulk put it, we're just waiting for the other shoe to drop.
Yeah.
And George Martin and now the showrunners are just, I'm again quoting the Hulk, taking a proverbial dump on the concept of drama.
Yeah.
Like there's no build up to it. And it's like all these cliffhangers, the Arya blindness, who believes that? Who believes that she is totally blind for the rest of the series?
Oh, clearly.
I just feel like that's like nobody could even. We don't even believe the bad things that happen because it's like,
No, unless it happens on, as many people are prone to say, unless it happens on camera, unless we see Stannis' head get chopped off, which that was firmly implanted in the DNA of the show when Ned Stark was beheaded in front of everybody. It's like this happens now. Let's kind of
and reiterated later when Arya meets the Brotherhood without banners,
True.
and she asks Thoros of Myr if he can bring back her father, and he says like it's a problem because he doesn't have a head anymore. And it's like, oh, so you kind of get it. Like if there are limits to this resurrection power. So if we saw Brienne actually chop Stannis' head off, then like, well, Melisandre can't bring him back.
Yeah. It seems like
they've left us with all these cliffhangers, like where no one believes Arya's dead, no one knows if Stannis is dead or Arya's blind, and no one believes that Jon is dead.
Yeah.
That just seems to be the prevailing sentiment, is that like, oh, it's a fake out.
Well, and Jon being dead, Jon's resurrection could be any number of things. Obviously, as the fan theories will have us believe, he could be warged into Ghost. He could be Azor Ahai. He could be... Yeah, and actually, one of the theories, the lesser love theories that I actually like, is that he'll be some kind of White Walker human hybrid and be able to basically control the white the whites. And that could be cool too. Let's start to kind of put a pin in this though, because I think what this is all leading to, for me, is and this season has kind of, and especially this last episode, it really sort of in my head it made me start to think, are we going to get to a point where, very much like Lost, our expectations now for this massive battle between Dragon and, it's all headed towards the wall. And, are we going to get to this point where what that ends up being is so underwhelming or is built up for so long that it's never, no matter what they do, it's never going to satisfy. And they're just completely effed either way. Is that where we're headed? Have they set themselves up for, the biggest letdown ever?
I wonder. I mean, there's definitely been like a kind of a personality, disorder going on in the show, where I think, for a couple of seasons, the political intrigue was so much more interesting to viewers than the coming disaster of winter.
Yeah.
And now it's sort of like flip flopped where, I just don't know. I still don't get that. Like the show is is. But it's not like the show totally flipped, and now they're presenting like the big buildup of Fire and Ice. I could be totally wrong. Maybe Fire and Ice is like Peter Baelish, finally getting that like clerk position at Howland Reed's castle or something.
Yeah.
I mean, I have no idea. Like it'd be so stupid.
Yeah.
And I'm the idiot that's like, no, of course it's the winter coming down, and the dragons are going to be the only thing that fights it. I just don't know. I guess that's the other thing is parts of the show are just so well done and so tonally consistent. But when you start adding up the overall narrative that we thought was headed in, we thought that the big thing was winter is coming, and we're just not,
I mean, I hate to say it, but that might. I mean, if this had been last year, I'd be like, "Oh, you're crazy." That they're clearly that's where they're headed. Now I'm
Right.
kind of like, I don't know, man. It may not be that. I'll tell you what. The only thing, the one thing that will completely satisfy me and probably everybody else, and completely right this ship forevermore, is if the Ned's Head episode of either next season, preferably next season, or season 7, if there's going to be a season 7 part 1 and part 2.
God, please don't do that, HBO.
If the Ned's Head episode is the freaking Night's King has the Horn of Winter and the whole wall falls down, and then it's like, holy shit! Now if the Ned's Head episode is the entire wall starts to collapse because the entire White Walker. I mean, if the entire Whites and White Walker army is assembled, it's millions of dead people strong, and they show up, and you're like. Because think about this, we already saw the battle between the Night's Watch and the Wildlings, which is pretty epic, pretty well done. You can't get much more epic. I mean, we can't just see that again with a bunch of whites, zombies trying to climb the wall and fall down, and like the only way for that to be more interesting dramatically is if they just get rid of the wall. And there has been that long rumored, if you go to message boards or if you're a reader of the book, like you'll know what the Horn of Winter is or rumored to be. And if that ends up being a thing and that tears down the wall or a good chunk of it and they just start pouring through, then everything we've seen up to this point, it starts to make sense because in all the political intrigue, all that stuff, none of it matters anymore because it's basically everyone in Westeros having to band together to face this off.
Yeah. And that would be amazing. And I mean, some of that stuff is cool. Like, yeah, it's great that the Boltons are going to be the ones that, like, eat it first.
I hope so, but man, after this, like they may be the you stay a villain long enough in popular fiction and you eventually become the hero. Just ask the raptors in Jurassic Park. It's like if you're around long enough and just kind of hang in there, you'll eventually be the ones to save the day. And it's like
and vice versa. Just ask Ethan Hunt.
Oh yeah, exactly. Let's hope.
Ooh, that's a button. Let's button that up.
Yes.
Let's roll credits.
Exactly.
Man, that's cool. I'm sure we'll have more to go back to with Game of Thrones.
Oh, I'm sure.
This has turned into an epic George Martin worthy episode. I don't even listen to the real Game of Thrones podcast, but I guess people fill up hours on this.
I can't
every
imagine.
week.
I can't imagine. I'm sure George R. R. Martin's just like, God damn it! Like I don't envy him in any way, shape, or form. No wonder he hasn't finished yet because he's just like he probably gets in these little grooves where he's like, yeah, this is making. And then he'll inadvertently or purposely hear like this podcast and be like, God damn it, and then just like get discouraged and.
Oh my God, I know.
Watch movies.
He shouldn't. Yeah,
he pays attention to fan stuff, so that's why I'm concerned. Like he goes to message boards and he goes to cons, and people are coming up to him all the time, going, "What happens if you die?" And he's like, "Fuck you!" Like I'm doing my best. This is hard. Like I don't.
Well, I mean, just while we did this podcast, Stephen King has written a book as long as George R. R. Martin.
There you go. There is that. That dude is prolific. Neil Gaiman too, man. Neil Gaiman's on it. I went to Neil Gaiman's website for the first time in 4 or 5 months, thinking that it would more or less be the same. That dude's put out another book in that time. I'm like, God, what weren't you just promoting this other book, and now there's another? I wish I was that prolific. Anyway, speaking of being prolific, you got a blog. You want to promote it?
Sure. Go to heytade.com, which is where we post these episodes. We also post them on SoundCloud. And what I keep forgetting to mention every week is if you go to heytade.com, please go down to the bottom of any page and subscribe to my weekly email recap, which would be really cool. And then you don't even have to like listen to me throughout the week or check in with the blog. You'll just get a nice email on Friday morning. It'll tell you what you missed. It'll have a link to this podcast, and you can listen from there.
I can personally
and I'm on
say
Twitter
it's an awesome email.
@heytade.
Well,
thank you.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And it is. I hate to say this, it is a great time saver. So that you can read.
No, I'm approaching the blog as though it is a mini magazine that I put together every week.
Yeah.
And there's just one thing per day, hopefully. And so it's like that's helped me out. It's like, my week kind of runs like Saturday to, wait, is that right? Saturday to Friday?
Mm-hmm.
And Friday the email goes out and it wraps up those 7 posts. And it's like, okay, on to the next one.
Yeah. Well, I'm at Taylor Trask on Twitter, TaylorTrask, and that's pretty much that's kind of the only thing I promote from right now. I've got a business and stuff, but I would rather interact with you all on Twitter. It's fun, so find me there.
Cool.
And
yeah,
I guess until next time.
Yeah, we love the Twitter. All right, that sounds good. Now we have a week to think of whatever next week's episode will be.
I would like to. We should jump in next time and do our. I'm anxious to do this Lord of the Rings Hobbit thing because we have such, as we've established before, we have such different frameworks from which to discuss that could be. I mean, I'm intensely curious about your thoughts on things.
Yeah, that'll be cool, and it'll give us a break from the Game of Thrones stuff. So I like the moratorium on Game of Thrones.
Until next year, Game of Thrones. We'll close the book on the Game of Thrones.
Yes, and until next week, we are Tade and
Taylor Trask.
All right. On the Todd and Taylor Show.
The Todd and Taylor Show.
We'll have that theme song any week now.
Exactly. All right. Bye-bye.